concentrated the complicated arrangements and misarrangements of the last century into a single irreducible image, being explored and legible. On the contrary, I found that what had happened was being processed, obscured, systematically leached of history and meaning, and finally being rendered less readable than it had seemed beforehand happened. As if overnight, the irreconcilable, unapproachable, unfathomable event had been made manageable. Reduced to center of effective palisades, totems, garlands of garland, hidden heights that come seem in some ways as destructive as the event itself. We now have the loved ones, we have the families, we have the heroes, and we have the terrorists.
Taste and sensitivity is repeatedly suggested, demanded an examine of what happened. Images of the intact powers were already being removed from advertising and entertainment, as if you might conveniently forget their agenda. People objected if you tried to talk about what happened on September 11th. You'd say, let's examine the roots of terrorism. Let's see what's behind all of this. Let's see if this has anything to do with American foreign policy, or if it's just the fanaticism and irrationality of the terrorists. As soon as you began to talk about these issues, as soon as you began to talk about American foreign policy, some editors, journalists, and politicians said you were justified in the terrorist attacks. The final allowable word on those who committed the attacks was to be your favorite hero heroes. It would be a year in which it was increasingly difficult to know who was infantilizing who.
The journalist John Reed, who wrote about the Russian Revolution in the 10 days that shook the world and who organized against World War I, wrote an essay in 1917 that seems like it could have been written today. He wrote, "War means an ugly mob madness, crucifying the truth tellers, choking the artists, sidetracking reforms, revolutions, and working with social forces. Already in America today, those citizens who oppose the entrance of their country into armed conflict are called traitors, and those who protest against the curtailing of legal rights and free speech are spoken of as dangerous lunatics."
The cry that there is no excuse for September 11th has become a means by which to stifle any serious public discussion of how U.S. foreign policy has helped to create a situation in which such acts of terror are possible. The very question of U.S. relationships in the Middle East has come to be seen as ungraceable, potentially lethal, the conversational equivalent of not playing bag on a bus. We take cover. We wait for the entire situation to be diffused, safely insulated behind battles of invective and counter-invective. Few opinions are allowed to develop, even fewer change.
In a strong sense, the binary of which proposes either you're with us or you're with the terrorists. Seems to make it untenable to hold any other position. Moreover, it is the same binary which returns us to an anachronistic division between East and West, and which in its sloshing autonomy returns us to an invidious distinction between civilization, our own, and barbarism, not coded as its own.
We've seen the insistent use of September 11th to justify the reconception of America's correct role in the world as one of initiating and waging virtually perpetual war. And the just war liberal left made it plain that it did not want to give them excuses, utilizing coinage and phrases not heard in the American media since the Cold War.
There's another important connection between our situation today and the Cold War. Terrorism has replaced communism as a rationale for the militarization of the country. For military adventures abroad and for the suppression of civil liberties at home. It serves the same purpose, creating hysteria. The word communism is used to justify the most egregious violations of human rights. Much of what went on during the Cold War was justified in the name of fighting communism, leading to millions of deaths in Southeast Asia and hundreds of thousands of deaths in Central America. A vast leap took place from fighting communism to actions against people and governments that had nothing to do with communism. So that in 1954, the United States overthrew the government of Guatemala, which was not communist, but it was expropriated the United States. In 1973, the United States overthrew the government of Chile, which was not communist, but it was not serving the interests of mankind. We have to bring up this history. We have to relate to what is happening today. Now that the Cold War is over, I think it is possible for Americans to assess more calmly the things we did during the Cold War, which now seem obviously absurd. We have to ask, the war on terrorism is being used in the same way.
What would you have done? The answer is not an easy one, but it has to start off by saying, I would not accept a solution that involves mass killing. I would try to find some other way. The other way is not passivity. The other way is non-acceptance. The other way is resistance without war. We have to ask ourselves if there are ever any situations in which we are morally and ethically justified to do violence against another human being. I don't just mean with I say, yeah, that's okay, but on an absolute philosophical level, by any actually justified? This is a very tough question.
For instance, when you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it seems that both sides have reason to be absolutely infuriated and vengeful. But at some point, it becomes absolutely ethically necessary for one to speak to very deeply to one not respond in kind. That movement of nonviolence breaks the cycle of revenge. Many people think that refusing to strike back for one is an condition of injury is taking out political promises, but actually, it is an adamant and vigilant stand. A difficult stand against violence itself. The United States is currently acting out vengeance. It seeks revenge for the injustice done to it on 9/11 and it does not care those whom it destroys who are not responsible for that particular injustice. But it's only humiliated by those events. It now seeks to shock and awe in order to restore its damaged sense of impermeability and supremacy.
Revenge becomes cynical, and one strike leads to another ad infinitum. When one breaks down the cycle, is not to do what the cycle expects, which would be to strike back, but rather to do something else, or what a lot of people call doing nothing. I think it's counterintuitive to many people who think that one's movement allowed to do nothing. Refusing to respond violently is a fertile kind of action. It's not doing the thing that's expected. There's a brief moment after 9/11 when Colin Powell said, "We should not rush to satisfy the desire for revenge." It was a great moment, an extraordinary moment, because what he was actually asking Americans to do was to stay with a sense of grief, mournfulness, and vulnerability. I think there's a way of living with vulnerability that most Americans is not easy. It's not easy to abide with grief, to let it go and quickly into action, because grief marks loss. I think it's only September 21st the President Bush said, "We'll finish grieving, and now it's time to act." And I thought, oh, that's not bad. 10 days of grieving and then we're done with it. And then what? And the military action striking back to harm to others the way they have harm to us.
Peace is an active and difficult resistance to the terrible satisfaction of war. It is the prerogative and the obligation of the injured. Peace is a vigilance. And it involves peace. And it does not mean that peacefulness are not aggressive. It does not mean that we do not have murderous impulses. That is going to take away from us getting nonviolence. Many people think, oh, you need to be nonviolent because it's a fucking violence as a result. You're not constituted by aggression. But our peace is precisely because we are constituted by aggression. Precisely because we are capable of waging war and striking back and doing massive injury. The peace becomes a necessity. It is